Welcome, everybody, to another edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. Well, the draft is now in the rear view. We are approaching rookie minicamp. The Giants veterans have reached still the voluntary offseason training program, but they are in phase 2, so that means they get to run around on the grass fields in shorts and T-shirts. But football, it's coming. And today I wanted to dive in with my special guest. You know him. He's a friend of the program, and I'd like to think I'm a friend of his program. Nick Falato, and man of many hats, but also a lot of you guys know him as the co-host of Big Blue Banter, which is one of the best podcasts around. I'd like to think also with mine and a few others. But Nick, thanks for joining me. Appreciate it. And draft season's over, but there's still a lot to go on and a lot to dive in. So appreciate you joining me.
Art, thank you so much for having me. And yes, this was quite the draft for the New York Giants. Seems like it's a little bit of a positive momentum for the Giants, which is something that, at least amongst the fan base, which is something that's relatively new in the last half decade or so. So I'm excited to talk about something that, we're feeling pretty solid about.
It lasted about 5 days, and then everyone could start arguing about jersey numbers and what should be retired and, who's overstepping their bounds and all that stuff that, I wouldn't say guys like you and I, but other people in our business feel the need to opine on all sorts of things. Next thing we're going to find out is Jackson Dart doesn't like eggs and how it's an affront to anyone who does like eggs, and that's just the way it is. Obviously, I'm kidding. I digress. Nick, what I wanted to do for you, and I don't know, for anyone who's listening to our podcast and you haven't watched Nick and Dan Schneier and do the job that they do on Big Blue Banter, which I think is a great job. It's a lot different from my podcast. They incorporate a lot of film analysis and breakdown, and Nick is one of the best out there. And if you don't know that, make sure you follow him and check it out. He does a real good job of kind of giving you insight that you're not going to get from an average content creator or even a beat writer, because it's not easy stuff to do, but Nick does a great job. What I wanted to do is take the draft class, kind of go inverted from the last pick to the first pick, talk a little bit about some of the players that the Giants brought in, where Nick thinks they fit in, what he likes about them, doesn't like about them, and then we'll go from there. We'll see where it takes us. You up for it, Nick?
Absolutely. Let's have some fun, Art.
Cool. Sounds good. So let's go to the Giants' last pick in the draft, and that was Corey Black from Oklahoma State. He's somebody that I had on my radar in a bunch of different mocks. You watch the show, click on NorthJersey.com. You know that we had Corey Black on our mock drafts. He's a DB and came in for a 30 visit. Nick, when you've watched some Corey Black, and again, I just want to preface this by saying I don't anticipate that Nick has dived into the film of Corey Black as much as he has of Abdul Carter. So let's, we'll take it from there, and whatever Nick knows or wants to share can, and then when we're done assessing those prospects, we'll move on to the next one.
Yes. So are you hearing me right now, Art? Because my camera is being funky on my end.
We are hearing you. So we will do what we can for the camera, and then let's just stick with audio and go from there. And then we'll just piece it together if you can.
Excellent. Sounds great. My face doesn't look super dumb on the video portion, so I'm happy about that. But yeah, we'll get into Corey Black is who we're going to start with. Giants did have him in for a top 30 visit. That was one of the themes of this draft season, was the Giants, a lot of the people they had in for top 30 visits, and this is pretty consistent throughout the Joe Schoen era, end up getting selected by the New York Giants, which is, I would say, exciting for us on the outside because it gives you somewhat of an inclination, somewhat of a tip of who to watch. So I watched Corey Black before the Giants selected him. And I liked what I saw, man, a physical cornerback who was going to come up. He's going to punch you in the mouth. I'd say in coverage, he's not the most sticky in man coverage, but he has the athletic traits, and that's what I'm looking for at this area of of the draft, the traits, to be very sticky in coverage. I also like when he does play from depth, has good eye discipline, does come downhill, explodes very quickly out of his stance and out of his back pedal, relatively fluid player. I want to say he ran a 4.35. I'm going to pull up his combine right now. He ran a 4.35 with a 1.58 10-yard split, 39 inches in the vert, 9.9 broad. So just good numbers across the board with also solid length, almost 32-inch arms, which is the benchmark you're always looking for a cornerback. So to get a player like this in the 7th round at pick 246, just to bet on his traits, the floor of him is, hey, let's have this guy be a special teams player. And that's something that he excelled at Oklahoma State as well, blocking kicks. So for me, when I'm here at this area of the draft and the tight end that we'll go over here in a little bit as well, Thomas Fadone II, we're just getting more Paisans over here, more Italians, support it. It's a bet on traits type of selections and just see if you can find lightning in a bottle late on day 3. Giants have been able to hit with some, day 3 picks recently, but the 7th round, that's a little bit of a stretch. We saw a decent return on investment from Jordan Riley in his first season. We didn't see as much last year, but getting a guy like Corey Black, who, if you look at this depth chart, it's a little bit thin in the secondary. If something were to happen to Paulson Adebo or Tay Banks, you're looking at the Trey Hawkins III, and who's to say Corey Black with a really good training camp couldn't maybe usurp a player like that. So I just like the bet on traits, get him with Manuel and see if we can find something here in the 7th round.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it'll be interesting when Black comes in and we'll get a first chance to really see him move around on the field at rookie minicamp starting on Friday. But then, when he assimilates into the offseason program with the veterans, is that do they look at him as kind of a tweener that he could play some safety, could play some corner? You mentioned obviously his awareness. He wants to come up and he's not necessarily a sticky guy, but he's a physical player. So can you see him, maneuvering around the secondary and moving around and kind of becoming a little bit of a chess piece as a depth piece? It'll be interesting. He comes from a bigger program, and you've kind of seen that as a trend for Joe Shane, is that, they have stuck to the bigger programs, save for a Darius Alexander who comes from Toledo. I mean, you're talking about Power 4 conferences and where they get their guys from, and sometimes that speaks to production, but also it speaks to presence and being able to get themselves into a program and compete for a spot in a roster, whether it's starting off on special teams, as you mentioned. So it's interesting. And the depth of the secondary was such a big deal last year because you not only had a lack in depth, but you had to rely on players who were unproven. Now, a guy like Corey Black can come in, and it's a big difference between where Trey Hawkins was a couple years ago and where Corey Black is. Corey Black can come in and just kind of, go play. They're not going to be forcing him into that CB2 spot now. You have Paulson Adebo, you have Cordell Flott and Tay Banks, and then whoever else can step up in that 4th spot. Trey Hawkins, as we mentioned, played pretty well, very sparingly last year. But of course, as has been the case with the Giants in recent years, when you think a player is kind of taking that next step, they get an injury and then they're out, and then their momentum is completely stalled. So an interesting prospect in Corey Black. We'll see where he fits. Now, you mentioned our other Paisan here, another Tommy, preparing maybe for the secondary Tommy aspect of the North Jersey community, and appealing to put fans in seats when the team is struggling, or at least that's what I was told Tommy DeVito represented last year. But anyway, Thomas Fadone II from Nebraska, very interesting prospect. He's a guy who I think is drafted a lot earlier if he doesn't have those double ACLs, the back-to-back. What's your take on Fadone? What have you seen, and what do you like about him?
He was the one Giant that was not brought in for a top 30 visit. And I think the Giants just looked at him. They appreciated what they viewed through the pre-draft process. And they also knew that you're betting on pedigree with a player like this. This was the number 1 ranked tight end coming out of his respective tight end recruiting class. And there was a guy by the name of Brock Bowers in that class. So coming out of high school, college football programs valued Thomas Fidone collectively more than a guy like Brock Bowers. Fidone comes into college, tears his ACL once, tears his ACL again. It's just a terrible happenstance for this young individual. But the last season and a half, I believe 2 years, he's just been healthy. In 2023, saw 41 targets, caught 25 of them for 260 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then last year, caught 36, 47 targets for 373 yards. Didn't have any touchdowns. He's playing in Nebraska, running the football. He's not the biggest, most overpowering type of tight end. He's only, I believe, 200 and PFF has him at 255, but he was 243 at the combine. But he's 6'5", and he has a massive catch radius, and he almost has 11-inch hands, which is unheard of. So it's another one of those let's bet on traits. More of a linear speed type of guy, someone who can stretch the seams. Had a lot of nuance to his routes. I believe he's, from what I've seen, crafty as a route runner, which is something that I always want to I want a tight end to have, because it allows you to create more space in the intermediate and the deep parts of the football field when you're going up against linebackers and everything. But I overall, when it comes to Fidone, the Giants tight end room, you have Manhurt, you have Daniel Bellinger. Daniel Bellinger's in his last year of his contract. You have Theo Johnson, and Theo Johnson is that main guy. Could Fidone work into 12 personnel packages? I think that's what this regime would like eventually to happen, because he has some blocking upside despite the frame. I wish he was a little bit more fluid, but he is an excellent athlete on the linear plane, and he offers just a massive catch radius over the middle of the field for Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Jackson Dart, whoever's playing quarterback for us, Art Stapleton. So I just like the bet on the traits, and we'll roll the dice again. Both of these picks, that's what both these picks were, and both of these players, and Corey Black out of Oklahoma State, the cornerback, and Thomas Fidone, the second, the tight end, both of them are traits-based picks.
Nick, you mentioned the tight end room, and let's talk about that for a second, because I think, going into year 4 with Shane and Dable, we've been trained to, as soon as you get a promising prospect, it's, well, we got to get him on the field now. We got to get him on the field, see where he's going. It's interesting that at least at most positions here, they've built it up to the point where they have some depth, where you don't necessarily need to push a guy like Corey Black or Thomas Fidone onto the field. These guys can go out there and earn it. You think back to when Trey Hawkins got his opportunity, back, they were desperate. They had no choice but to move Adoree Jackson inside to the nickel, because they had nobody else to play the nickel. And then you had Trey Hawkins on the outside, and that was a camp move because it was out of desperation. It wasn't that Trey Hawkins wasn't showing anything in camp, but it was really a desperation. So the next year when Trey Hawkins wasn't on the outside to start camp, it was almost like, boy, that experiment is over. But it really was a course correction, so to speak, about Trey Hawkins' trajectory. They didn't think he would be ready that early, and they really had no choice. When you talk about a guy like Fidone in that tight end room, now you're dealing with, look, we don't know where Bellinger is going to be after this year. We're not sure if Bellinger's a factor. We know why they like Chris Manhertz. Theo Johnson, if healthy, started to show last year, again, that, you show what your promise is, and then you unfortunately get an injury. That's kind of been a trend for the Giants' younger players. And then you have Greg Dulcich, who has probably gotten more mention this spring other than Theo Johnson, any tight end, and that's because he spent time with Russell Wilson in Denver, and now he's here. You can't get much out of Dulcich last year, but he'll be an interesting player to watch this offseason, because I think he has that physical skill set as a receiver. So what do you think about that when you're looking at players? You can almost look at them as, look, we say developmental and projects. We probably use them way too much, but this is a room that's very interesting and could look a lot differently when the season starts, but we just don't know.
We just don't know. And the Greg Dulcich thing is the most unpredictable. Comes in, midway or towards the end of last season. This was a top 80 pick just a few years ago. He's 25 years old. He was an excellent receiving tight end back at UCLA. I remember studying him in the draft. Goes to Denver, gets injured his rookie season. Sean Payton comes in, and it's just kind of awkward with him. We know Sean Payton has a specific archetype he's looking for in a tight end. Dolchik, for one reason or another, did not fit that. But now he comes over here, and we think about the archetype that Joe Shane and Brian Dable are looking for. And you go back to when they had when obviously the Darren Waller acquisition, and then there was a Lawrence as well, Lawrence Cager, who they brought in, the former wide receiver. They've been trying to locate this field stretching tight end who could split the seam, somebody who was a little bit more athletic, and they've done that in a variety of different ways. And the Darren Waller experiment didn't end up working out, but they get Theo Johnson. Theo Johnson tested like that, and Theo Johnson is an excellent athlete. He's also 270 pounds, and he can be your inline blocker if you need him to do that. But I still think they want another one of those tight ends who is a little bit more fluid, like a former wide receiver, and Dolchik fits that archetype. And you can argue that Thomas Fidone II also fits that archetype. So I'm wondering, when training camp rolls around, if there's going to be some sort of camp battle between those two specific tight ends. 'Cause I don't know how many tight ends the Giants will keep, where Daniel Bellinger factors into this. Theo is obviously safe. I would assume that Chris Manhertz is safe because he's just basically a sixth offensive lineman out there. And anybody who listens to Big Blue Banter, the podcast I have with Dan Schneider, knows I'm a big Chris Manhertz fan. I was saying that the Giants needed to sign Chris Manhertz like 5 or 6 years ago, because he was just like a free agent every like 1 or 2 years. And I was just like, I love a tight end who just you could put out there and he's just going to handle a 270-pound edge rusher. And it's not even like he's going to lose slow enough. That's all you want from your tight ends, as Mike Mayock says, right? Art? Lose slow enough. That's all you want. This guy actually like wins and allows the running back to go through the gap unscathed. That's one of the reasons why I appreciate him, even though he's getting a little long in the tooth. But back to the original question. I'm curious to see if it's going to come down to, will there be a roster spot between Thomas Fidone II and Greg Dulcich? And right now it's like maybe they'll carry 4 tight ends, but also you have injuries. There's a lot that's going to factor in throughout mini camp and OTAs and training camps and all that kind of stuff. But you got 2 athletes who can stretch the seam theoretically in Fidone II and Dulcich. And I just, judging by what Shane has done in the past and Dable, they want that specific type of player here.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, let's move on to Marcus Bowe, offensive lineman from Purdue. It's interesting that, after they drafted him that Saturday night, Dable and Shane both suggested that Bowe would start out at tackle. I think long-term, I would assume that they view him as a potential starting guard, whether it's on the right side or the left side. But you just don't know how things are going. And I think at this point, they're probably trying, with Evan Neal moving inside, they're probably trying to get a younger player on the outside that they can say, all right, let's see where this guy is. But to me, the move means that initially they don't view Bowe as one of their top 5 offensive linemen, that they think he can develop into that, but they're not bringing him in right away, which I thought, had they taken an interior player in day 1 or day 2, they probably would have had that player competing for that right guard spot to be able to be a starter. What's your take on Bowe? What has your film study shown on him? And I know he's a favorite of a lot of Giants fans, really a favorite across the league, because any of those lists that you look at as sleepers and players who are the best picks, value picks in that spot, in day 3, I think Bowe certainly qualifies as that for the Giants.
Absolutely. I mean, him falling to 154 in the 5th round is ridiculous. And it's funny, going into that draft, the day 3 of the draft, it was like, yeah, I would love to get Cam Scatteraboo or Marcus Bowe at 105. I just don't know which direction they're going to go. And they end up going with Scatteraboo, we'll talk about in a little bit. And then Bowe falls to them to 154. How fortuitous. How beautiful is that for the New York Giants? And I'm a fan of Bowe's game. He's just one of the, I think I termed it in my report on him, he has feather feet. He's just so light on his feet. They just pick up and they put down, and they seem so damn quiet while they're doing it. And it's very smooth. It's very controlled. It's very balanced. And that's one aspect of his overall movement skills, whether you're kicking him in space, whether he's comboing and climbing up to the second level, whatever it is, out on an island. He's just an effortless mover at 300 plus pounds. Now, the one issue that you could say is he's only slightly over 300 plus pounds. So he's a little bit undersized, needs to add a little bit more sand to his ass. And then there's the length thing. When you're playing offensive tackle, 33-inch arms are typically that benchmark. Have there been 32-inch arm tackles starting and excelling? Yes, but that's more of an anomaly rather than a consistent thing that you see across the NFL. And at his pro day, he had 32.5-inch arms. At his at the combine, I think it was 32 inches. But either way, doesn't really have the length for it. So he's not going to be able to dictate. A lot of edge rushers coming from wide angles will be able to dictate to him. And if they're power edge rushers, they might be able to put him on his back more frequently just because they can make that initial contact and they're coming from a wide angle and he's 303 pounds. That's the negative. I like this pick a lot. I like Marcus Bowe. Where I would start him at is right tackle, despite all of the shortcomings that I just mentioned, because of his overall movement skills. And the Giants don't really have any answers at right tackle. Not that they really have many inside long term, depending on how we view Jake Kubis, who I know the Giants inside the building do appreciate. So I don't want to forget about his name. So for me, I'm looking at the Marcus Bowe acquisition, the draft selection, and I'm just saying, I hope this guy comes in. The Giants can try him at right tackle, see what they think, see if he can overcome some of those limitations, because he is a very smart and cerebral player who understands angles, leverages angles well in the run game, and when he is doing his pass sets, frames his blocks well. If he adds maybe a little bit more strength, maybe it won't be an issue, and then he could be one of those rare starting tackles who has a little bit of short arms, similar to Zach Tom, who is the who was coming out of Wake Forest a couple years ago and is playing for the Packers right now. That's where I want him to start, behind Jermaine Illuminor, learning the right tackle position. And then if it doesn't work out, the Giants could kick him inside and hopefully, and I can't speak to his coachability, Art, but hopefully he's coachable enough to where he can make that type of transition and possibly be a fixture inside for the New York Giants next to John Michael Schmitz, or maybe, over John Michael Schmitz if John Michael Schmitz doesn't take a certain step forward. That whole conversation is something that's cropped up during this offseason as well. My thing is, he gives you options. He's very talented, and he has that elite trait of just being an effortless, controlled mover because he is just so damn light on his feet. So I just want to add players like that to this roster.
And speaking about the whole, again, you get back to the depth. I mean, look, you're going into year 4 for this regime. You should be drafting depth pieces and quality depth pieces to become foundational pieces. And there is nothing wrong with Marcus Bowe being on that active, inactive line on game days to start the season, with Jermaine Illuminor at right tackle, with Andrew Thomas at left tackle, and you have Greg Van Roten. If Kubas can compete at that right guard, we'll see what happens with Evan Neal. If he can somehow reinvent himself quickly and he factors in at right guard, now all of a sudden you're talking about a young offensive lineman that the Giants believe in, that might not get on the field consistently until midseason. But when he does, you want him to be prepared and you want him to be able to be that foundational piece. So, I know there are fans out there who look at it and go, well, how come Bowe isn't starting? Illuminor's only here for another year, and, you need to get Bowe in a position where he can be one of your top 5 offensive linemen. Well, you put your trust in the coaching staff and the front office. Don't forget, they have a factor in. They have a say in this as to where guys line up, or when they have the decisions organizationally of where a guy goes. You want that guy on the field. You want to be able to say he's one of our top 5 linemen, but he might not be right now. That doesn't make it a bad pick. I like everything you said about Bowe. Now let's go to the most popular pick that the Giants made this year, and that's the 4th rounder, Cam Skattebo, the running back out of Arizona State. The stories, the tales are endless. This is almost like a Big Fish situation where, the movie, I don't know if you're familiar with that, Nick, but just the idea of, it's a Forrest Gump-esque thing that every big event, Forrest Gump was a part of. It's almost like Cam Skattebo. Any little story that you hear, as his high school coach told me when I talked to him last week for a column I wrote on Skattebo, was everything you've heard is probably true. And that's just the legend of Cam Skattebo. Tell me what you like about Skattebo. I know you like him. I know everybody likes Cam Skattebo. Where does he factor in at the next level?
He factors in well with this running back room. To me, he complements Tyrone Tracy Jr. And like, I don't even like, people are like, oh, is he going to be the 1A? He's going to be the 1B. I'm like, I don't really know if it matters right now. Like, thinking about it like that, like, let's just use both of these backs to their strengths and to their advantages. And the difference with Cam Scadaboo and Tyrone Tracy Jr., who I really liked coming out of college last year, is Cam Scadaboo has a little bit more thickness to him, runs a little bit lower than Tyrone Tracy Jr., not as explosive, but holy crap, Art, is his feet wildly efficient, right? Like, you never see any wasted movement with Cam Scadaboo. He knows where he's going. He's a very determined runner, and he has excellent, if not elite, contact balance because he runs so damn low behind his pads. And what I mean by that is, people will, if you don't get a clean shot on Cam Scad, and even when you do, and what I mean a clean shot is you have him framed up, you're like a tiger pouncing on your prey as a defender, and then you wrap him up. Like, that's the way you bring him to the deck. Now, in football, when it comes to angles, players in pursuit, that's not always the case, right? Like, defenders don't always have clean looks. They just throw their body at you and they're trying to, and that usually will bring most running backs down. But Cam Scadaboo, holy crap, at Arizona State, this guy was not going down unless you got like clean look at him. And even when you thought he was down, his core strength and his balance gave him the ability to just like stick his arm in the deck and then just like propel himself back towards the path where the end zone was going, right? Like where the end zone was. I came away from his tape overall just very appreciative of not only his toughness, but his ability to generate offense and to be the fulcrum of the offense as a running back playing against Texas in the national championship playoffs. Like, this is like, holy crap. Like, this guy is the engine of this offense, and people are like loading the box up against him, and he's still able to break these runs. So look, he's from an athletic standpoint, he's a 4.65 guy, I think is what he ran or something. He ran a 4.65, 158, 10-yard split, but then he has that almost 40-inch vertical jump with a 10.3 broad. And you see that type of short area explosiveness. I think the way I think I termed it in some funky way when the Giants drafted him, or when I watched his tape, it was like he's like dental floss picking through the teeth of the defense because he could just like maneuver through these like really tight crevices. And then the next thing you know, he has the peripheral vision to understand, okay, I got a linebacker flowing over the top to fit this way. He's being a little undisciplined, cheating this way. Put my foot in the ground, one cut, and now I'm where he just was. And it's that instantaneous decision-making ability that maximizes all of the other traits that I've been talking about. So I'm happy the Giants were able to get him where he was. I don't think the lack of high-end athletic traits will prevent him from being a successful running back. I think this is going to be a player we're going to be talking about for a very long time.
You know, it's funny, Brian Baldinger for NFL Network, we all know Baldy's breakdowns and everything else. He compared him to David Montgomery, who has certainly had a rebirth in his career in Detroit, and what he's done in Detroit, working with Jahmyr Gibbs the last couple of years. And, you know, I said it last year that the Giants were hoping for kind of that poor man's combination with Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary to be similar to what the Detroit Lions were setting up with Gibbs and Montgomery. This is even more so, I think, a tandem that could be that. And I think, you know, we're so, and present company included, so focused on fantasy football, and we've got who's the guy that every week is going to be the bell cow or be the one who's going to get you the most points. And I truly think that this could be a combination where, based on matchups, you could go into a week. You know, it's almost similar to when the Giants had Ahmad Bradshaw and Brandon Jacobs. Like, you just didn't know which running back would be most effective on a given day. You know, I'm not going to go all the way back to 2007 when they had the, you know, three-headed monster at least starting out, and Ahmad didn't factor into the end of the year. You know, I said this through the draft evaluation that I loved Kyle Monangai, who ended up going to Chicago, as that, you know, he gave me a lot of Ahmad Bradshaw vibes. And then I started watching Scadaboo, and I was like, no, this is Ahmad Bradshaw. Yeah. Just the idea of the low center of gravity, the contact balance, the way, just the toughness. And, you know, we've talked about that. We've written about it. You know, you've said it on your podcast and the various places that you've written, just in terms of, what Scadaboo can bring to this offense gives it that little identity that, look, if he comes out and he's wearing 44 at rookie minicamp, which, they gave it out defensively, but it wouldn't surprise me to see if they double up on 44 and put Scadaboo. Although talk about the jersey numbers, it wouldn't surprise me if Scadaboo, doubles his college number. He ends up in 44, and all of a sudden, with everything that we're going to talk about, Abdul Carter and Jackson Dart, it wouldn't surprise me if Scadaboo's name and jersey number goes up, 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 all of a sudden in sales, because Giants fans, Nick, they will appreciate Scadaboo maybe more than any other player in this rookie draft class.
I agree. Now, there's one hopefully that we'll go over a little later. They'll appreciate if he reaches the potential that Brian Dable sees in him. That would be lovely. But you're right, Cam Scadaboo is going to be a jersey sales type of guy. Somebody who every time he scores a touchdown, every time he has a nice run, there's going to be a scat or boo or something like that, just emanating out of MetLife.
Right. You've got Cruz, which ironically, Victor was the one who announced the pick of Scadaboo in Germany. And then you have last year Leak, and I think that boo, which the Giants have gotten used to being booed at MetLife Stadium. This would be a welcomed boos for the New York Giants, as opposed to the boos that most of the fans have been drowning their sorrows in and tailgates for the last decade or so. Anyway, I digress. Let's go to the third round pick. Another guy I really liked for the Giants, and this is really the first year in a while that all of the guys that I liked in my mock drafts just matched up and they ended up taking them. And I don't know if that means that I finally know what I'm talking about, or Joe Shane knows what he's talking about, or maybe a little bit of a combination. But Darius Alexander from Toledo put on a show at the Senior Bowl. He just seems like that perfect guy to develop into someone who could really be a tandem with Dexter Lawrence. What have you seen from Alexander in your film study?
Big fan of Darius Alexander. Watched him really early on in my process because I don't usually get to these college kids until like December, depending on how good the Giants are. And since the Giants weren't that great this year, I was able to start a little bit early. And he was one of the first defensive linemen that I studied. And I was like, oh man, is anybody talking about this guy? Like, I knew he had an invite extended to him for the Reese's Senior Bowl, which, as you said, he killed that event, did a great job. Older prospect, but he's a one gap penetrator, and he doesn't have to just be that. He's not pigeonholed into being that. He can anchor down, albeit he was going up against a lesser competition. But if you want him to wreak havoc and challenge offensive line angles, which is what the Giants are going to be able to do in such an exciting fashion, especially if they can get into like 3rd and 5 and 3rd and 6 situations, because you're going to dictate one-on-ones based on where you're going to use all of these weapons that the Giants have on their defensive front. And that's not even incorporating the fact that you can bring 5 and you can bring 6 and you can blitz and you could do so many different things from a simulated pressure standpoint. Just from, I can align Dexter Lawrence opposite of Darius Alexander and then Abdul Carter or Brian Burns towards Darius Alexander, forcing a one-on-one matchup with that tackle. And then I'm basically putting this guard is like the only situation that's going to happen is this guard is going to have a one-on-one block on Darius Alexander, and Darius Alexander knows that. So you give him a bunch of reps like that. His explosiveness off the line of scrimmage combined with his length and his ability to leverage his hands while going forward should lead to one-on-one wins for Darius Alexander, who can take advantage of that opportunity because all of the attention is being put on Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns and Abdul Carter and all these other guys. So I've been pounding the table, Art, for a year and a half. The Giants need to get another defensive line. Basically, since the Giants traded Leonard Williams, I looked at the depth chart. I was like, yo, we need to do something about this. Sean Robinson didn't resign. I'm like, guys, we need to do something about this. This is not great. Dexter Lawrence can't do everything. And then when Dexter Lawrence got hurt, Shane Bowen kind of changed his defensive philosophy, and we had to go in towards a much more heavy front and not as many, too high reads and the things that he did with the Tennessee Titans that I believe he wants to do here in New York. Now he has that personnel to do it. And now the most importantly, you could probably stay ahead of the script on these early downs and these rundowns. You also have Raheem Nunez-Roches who can help you with that. But Darius Alexander, again, he's not like a two-gapper, but he is somebody who can hold his own as a run defender next to Dexter Lawrence. And if the Giants can just stop the run on early downs and get to those get to those third downs and the second down and longs, allow these guys to pin their ears back. Or like the Giants might have, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but they might have the best pass rush in the entire NFL. And you just get them in enough situations like that. I think we will see that manifest. And Darius Alexander will be a small part of that, but albeit a very important and crucial one, because you can't have a weak link on a defense. And the Giants have had plenty. And now it just looking over their starters, I'm knocking on wood. Hopefully they don't get injured. Art. They have they don't really have a weak point on the defense. I'm not saying that they're completely solid, but you can get by with the players that they currently have. And if you can get by with the players that you currently have, and then you look at the strengths of the Giants, it's like, I think those strengths will be able to overcome what the offense is trying to do. And those strengths are just allowing them to pass rush. So just stop the run on early downs, which Darius Alexander will help you do, and then allow him to pin his ears back next to all these other studs. And I think we're just going to see the fruits of this pick, because he is the final piece to the puzzle that is what could possibly be the best pass rush in the National Football League, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, last year when we talked about the offensive line, I was told by several people that when Greg Van Roten came in, you need Greg Van Roten to be 5 of 5 on your offensive line, meaning he's a veteran. He's a journeyman. He's going to win some. He's going to lose some. But if he is your 5th best starting offensive lineman, that means that you've done a great job of putting together your offensive line. Now, there's debate, beyond. To me, I thought John Runyon got a bad rap from a lot of people last year. I think Runyon was fine. I know because he got $10 million a year. Everybody focuses on the money. Look, I have no problem as long as Andrew Thomas stays healthy. With Thomas, Runyon, and Illuminor, those are your top 3 linemen. Now, you mentioned earlier you need a ton out of JMS. We need John Michael Schmitz to take his step up in his game. And if he doesn't, then center becomes an issue, and you've got to figure out what you got. So then if you have Greg Van Roten as your 5th out of 5, well, then all of a sudden you're talking about a pretty good offensive line, at least a solid unit, and far greater than what the Giants have had. The reason I bring that up is you mentioned the pass rush on defense. And if you look at the quote-unquote starting 11 on this team, who is the weakest link on this team? Who is the worst player out of 11? Now, if you're talking base, you're probably going to say, if he's starting, Raheem Nunez-Roches or Tay Banks. Okay? So if you're saying that, and then if you want to throw Micah McFadden in there, which is crazy, because of the production that Micah has, I think, because of the missed tackles he's had, I think he probably gets a little bit of a bad rap as far as developing into what he's become off of a 5th-round pick. That's a win. You know what I mean? That pick is a win. That player is a win. So if you're talking about this defense, now all of a sudden you're saying your weakest link is maybe a 3rd defensive lineman who might not even be on the field if things go well, as you mentioned, because you're probably just going with Dex and Darius Alexander and then the 3 edge guys. And then you're talking Tay Banks potentially as your weakest link if you have Drew Phillips in there in the nickel, and then you talk your linebackers. And to me, a major key for this defense is getting Bobby Okereke back to where he was 2 years ago. Whatever fault, wherever you want to put the blame from last season, whether it was Shane Bowen and this scheme and Okereke felt out of water and whatever it was, you better figure it out. Because Bobby Okereke is too good to look like he looked last year in that defense. And if you can get Okereke, who I was calling the best free agent the Giants have had since Antrell Roll, and last year kind of let me down a little bit. And again, I'm not putting it all on Bobby. I'm not putting it all on Shane Bowen and the pieces around him. But if Bobby Okereke is an elite player or gets to where he was 2 years ago, Now you're talking about this defense really making waves and really making plays. So I like your point about the pass rush, but I also know that because of what they have around them, and they seem to be settled on the back end a lot more than they were last year. If you can get Newman to reach his potential, Javon Holland, I think, is a very good player when he's at his best. Paulson Adebo, look, they believe in him. There are a lot of smart people around the NFL who have told me that Paulson Adebo is a steal at what the Giants got. Again, health. As long as his leg is good, we'll see an elite player or borderline elite player and an ascending player at corner, and then you come down to Banks and those guys. So it's an interesting look at that defense, and then we'll obviously get to the cornerstone in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to shift to draft pick that everybody wants to talk about, and we don't know when he's going to play. I had a big story post on NorthJersey.com on Tuesday morning, spent a lot of time. I think we went over 2,000 words. What is the plan for Jackson Dart? When will Jackson Dart play? Will it be a red shirt? And all those questions are valid to think about it. I want to know from you, Nick, when you started your off-season work and you started studying the quarterbacks, I don't remember, so forgive me. What did you see from Jackson Dart? And then when you tried to project what Jackson Dart would be in Dable's system, what do you like? What do you don't like about Jackson Dart as a potential QB1 for the Giants at some point down the road?
So to start, he's coming from Lane Kiffin's offense, which is a high-tempo RPO spread offense that gives the quarterbacks some more some defined reads pre to post snap, and he still has to process exactly what's happening pre to post, but if a certain thing does happen, he knows where to go with the football. That's not the entire offense though, right? Like the offense still had like 3-level reads, and one aspect of Jackson Dart that is the antithesis of Daniel Jones, not to kick Daniel Jones while he's down or while he's not here, is Jackson Dart, and this got him in trouble sometimes, but I do love this type of trait. He's going to target that deep guy, right? Like there is no reluctance to Jackson Dart's game. He wants to throw it deep. He wants to create the explosive play, which has been the bane of the New York Giants offense's existence for the last 6 years, is their inability to create explosive plays. They finished in the bottom 5, I think, in 4 out of the 5 out of the last 6 years, and they were dead last, I think, twice, maybe 3 times. So I appreciate that aspect. So I think that's exactly what Brian Daboll wants in a quarterback. And then you bring in his arm talent. He has enough arm talent. He has sufficient arm talent to make every throw in the NFL. It's not Josh Allen's arm. It's not Patrick Mahomes' arm. It's a good NFL arm, though. It's an above average, a good to very good NFL arm. And I appreciate the touch and the pacing he puts on the football when he's targeting between the numbers over the middle of the field. If he wants to work the dig, if he wants to work the seam, he can layer it over the top of a linebacker before the safety, and he does that well. So from a traits perspective, also the moxie and the toughness that he runs with, and his just overall athletic ability to run, all of that is endearing for me. It's something that I want in my quarterback. Now, how am I going to prognosticate him coming from such an offense that doesn't translate typically to what the NFL has? It's a little difficult. I'm going to trust Brian Daboll though, and I've seen enough of his tape, Jackson Dart, to know that he's still going through, and he's hitting these concepts that are a little bit more complex. It's not all just Mickey Mouse stuff. I know the offense in general, it did give him those reads where you're able to take advantage of space in college football because there's more space to take advantage of because of the hashes. And also the athletes are not nearly as explosive as they are in the NFL. So that space is going to be limited. Those windows are going to close. But I've seen enough from Dart to at least say I'm comfortable putting him with Brian Daboll and allowing Brian Daboll to do what he has to do, because I've seen enough processing at the level within the offense that he was able to process. That's the only way we can evaluate this guy, Art, right? Is through the offense that he played in, and he did that well, and he was very productive. There were certain games with Jackson Dart where I wish he rose to the occasion a little bit more, and he fell on his face. But overall, I'm happy the Giants got their guy. right? We've been talking about for how many years? It's like, oh, the Giants need to get their guy. Brian Dable needs to get his guy, blah, blah, blah. And now the Giants finally got that guy. Let Brian Dable do his work. I don't think I would say I'm optimistic, and I'm not saying I'm pessimistic. I'm just interested and happy that they got their guys. Probably the way I would term it right now.
Totally agree with you. I think I had the same concerns. I had heard from multiple people around the NFL the idea of, Kiffin's offense. Where does it fit? Is he a half the field read guy? They do a good job of freeing up college receivers. Can he see the whole field? If I'm a Giants fan, I'm looking at it and I'm putting my faith in Brian Dable. And I know some people have lost faith in Brian Dable, but the reality is that you have Brian Dable as your head coach because you want him to find your next quarterback. And the things they do, we've heard a lot about what Shedeur Sanders didn't do in the pre-draft evaluation process, especially when Dable got involved and gave his quarterbacks the tests, testing what they know, trying to create a baseline, then testing them again on the board when they got to the private workouts. Dart aced all of the private stuff, all of the behind the scenes. We knew he had it physically on the field, but he aced all of it. I mean, so much so as I wrote in the piece on Dart this morning, is the first thing Joe Shane said to him on the phone call, telling him that the Giants were drafting him, was that you aced everything. You killed our pre-draft process. And that's what Josh Allen did. So for everybody who's, poo-pooing the idea of the Giants, or saying, oh, well, how could they dare compare Jackson Dart to Josh Allen? No, they're not comparing the players, they're comparing the process. And I think that's a big distinction here that needs to be made. Yes, are there similarities? Could you see some Josh Allen in Jackson Dart when he's bowling over a defender? John Gruden QB school with Jackson Dart was phenomenal. I don't know if you saw it, Nick, but I'm sure you did at some point. And that was great. If you haven't seen it, go to YouTube, find it on Barstool, and Gruden's camp with Jackson Dart was phenomenal. You get a little sense of where Jackson Dart is. So you got to put your faith that Dable has tested him out to show that he can go through his progressions, but we don't know until he gets on the field. When is that going to be? Well, I think rookie minicamp is just that. He's running around in shorts. You're not going to necessarily see a lot of him in team drills, but Dable did say the draft picks are not going to be in team drills. They're just going to do individual drills. But Dart might be the exception because you put the quarterback out there in the red jersey. It's basically 7-on-7, so you're not worried about him getting tangled up with anybody. Everybody's staying away. So maybe we see a little bit of Dart this weekend. But, Dable did say, in training camp, we're going to sprinkle him in when he's not expecting it. And we're going to put him in with the ones when he doesn't expect to get put in with the ones, because we need to test where he is essentially on a day-to-day basis to see how that room is going to set up. So like I said, check out that story I posted on northjersey.com, because I think it has some details in there, and nothing is set in stone. Look, if two guys get hurt tomorrow, all of a sudden Jackson Dart is sitting there, and maybe they have to accelerate this learning curve to a point where they have to get him on the field. They never would have expected to have to do that with Tommy DeVito back in 2022, and yet 2023, and they actually did. So it'll be an interesting thing. We've been doing this. I got to thank Nick, because we've been doing this for almost an hour now. So I hope you guys appreciate the content. We've got one player left, and he was probably the best player in the entire 2025 draft. Nick, tell me, what do you like about Abdul Carter, and where do you see him fitting? Everybody's trying to guess where Abdul Carter is going to fit. What do you like from what you've seen, and where do you envision him? Where would you want that? I'll make that the question. Where would you want to see Abdul start out, in training camp, when we're watching these guys kind of move around and what formations they're putting out there?
Where I want to see him on Sunday, I want to see him used as a defensive weapon, right? Like we hear that a lot with the offense. Oh, he's an offensive weapon, which kind of has a pejorative to it. And I do not mean that when it comes to Abdul Carter. When those Giants are in these 3rd and 5+, even 2nd and 7, 2nd and 8. These obvious passing situations. I want Abdul Carter to be used everywhere along the defensive front, depending on what the offense is doing. Basically like a chess piece that you can employ against any defensive strategy or offensive strategy to wreck that strategy. And what I mean by that is if the Giants are going up against Jaden Daniels, if they're going up against Jalen Hurts, and those guys are, running a little bit like they like to, you have now Abdul Carter, who could be a quarterback spot. You can put him in the A gap. You can send him through the A gap. You can align him wide next to Dexter Lawrence, who is a 4-eye standing right on that tackle. That tackle is going to need to stab Dexter Lawrence with his arm, nothing else, with his arm, and then try to get out to Abdul Carter to cut off that angle. We know that Shane Bowen comes from the school of thought, wide 9. It's something that Jim Schwartz used to uses as well as a defensive coordinator. So for me, I want him to handle all of these responsibilities and be a movable chess piece all over the defensive front and make it so that the offense is guessing all the time from a protection standpoint. I want the offensive line coach every week before they play the New York Giants to be bald if he has hair, like just ripping his hair out, because it's like, I got to block Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Kayvon. Abdul Carter, I don't know where he's going to go because he's fluid enough to drop into space. He could be the quarterback spy. He could be acting as a quarterback spy, and then he could just go right through the A gap. Like, just give the offense headaches. But that's how I really want him to be employed. And he's in this unique spot where the Giants are picking top 5, and they get this player. And yeah, he could be an every down player if you need him to. But the Giants have an infrastructure in place on their defensive line where you don't have to have him do that. I'm not saying you don't use or you play him 20 snaps. I'm not saying any of that. I'm not saying he's just a sub-package rusher. But when you get to those sub-packages, I want him to pin his ears back and allow him to go get it. And look, he's I don't think he's bad against the run, but that's not necessarily a strength, like anchoring down and then stacking and shedding. That's not necessarily what he does. This guy's played edge one season, and he had over 60 pressures at Penn State. So he's a former linebacker, so he's still learning, but you can bring him along slowly while still giving him snaps and a one defined role within those snaps. So he could still play 40+ snaps every game, but you don't have to have him anchoring down against a 315-pound tackle when you have Kayvon and you have Brian Burns if you're running that type of defense. But we know that Shane Bowen likes to slant, he likes to penetrate, he likes to get his defensive linemen and his edge rushers moving laterally sometimes, stunting at the line of scrimmage, exchanging gaps. With Abdul Carter and Brian Burns, those are some of the quickest, most instantaneous edge rushers who can do that, move laterally, avoid clean contact, and then present their numbers in a gap. So you can use that as a means to combat the run defense, depending on what teams you're going against. If you're playing against zone teams, and Abdul Carter allows you to do that so successfully. So I see the rhetoric on Twitter, people will be like, oh, well, is he going to start? He's going to, it's like, yeah, like I want him to play as many snaps as possible. Doesn't need to all the time, but it's mainly like on these money downs. The reason why the Giants drafted him is because he's a closer, right? He's a closer. You have 2 high side rushers now who are arguably 2 of the better high side, at least they could be the best pair of high side rushers in the league. Steelers might have something to say about that with Watt and Herbig. But what I mean by high side rushers is they're going to stress those angles, right? Going around the outside arm of the tackle and then collapse. And now you have Dexter Lawrence, who's one of the best interior pass rushers, pushing the pocket. So there's nowhere for that quarterback to step up. So I want to get those situations as well. And then you can use Kayvon maybe in like a NASCAR type of package. My overall point is, as I bloviate over here.
We bloviate on this show. Don't worry.
My overall point is I just want to be unpredictable. I just want Shane Bowen. If Shane Bowen can't get this to work, that's a problem, because there are many defensive coordinators who would never even think about having this type of pass rushing personnel. And the Giants have that right now. And they have enough on the back end. A little nervous about it, but they have enough on the back end to hold up in coverage. So that's what and I hope that also Shane Bowen figures out a way to mitigate the impact of the quick passing attack. Because we saw last year, like week 2 against Washington, Cliff Kingsbury was just throwing like bubbles and horizontal, just getting 6, 5, 6. Abdul could probably help you with that in one way or another, but I want to see a clinic of coaching from Shane Bowen, and he has personnel to allow him to get into his bag. Giants led the league in sacks for like 7 weeks last year, and they were one of the worst teams in the NFL. With this personnel, Abdul Carter, they should be fine and like beyond fine. And I'm excited to watch how it all comes together.
I had someone in the Giants building when the idea came up pre-draft, the idea of why would you take Abdul Carter? You're set at edge. Where's he going to play? That kind of thing. And I had someone tell me 32 teams in the NFL, if you tell them they can have Abdul Carter, they will put Abdul Carter on the field and then figure out which of the other 10 guys has to come off the field because Abdul Carter is going on the field. That's how good the NFL thinks that this player can be. You could make the argument that going into every week, the opposing defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator would be watching the Giants saying, okay, what do we do with Dexter? And then how do we stop Abdul Carter? Because Abdul Carter has the potential of having a Von Miller type impact that early in his career just because of the natural gifts that he has. And then if you can take advantage of that, like you said, Shane Bowen, big year for him as a defensive coordinator, but this entire staff work together, get to a point where, your outside linebackers coach, Charlie Bullen, and Andre Patterson and Brian Cox are all working together. That was a thought at the beginning of last year, and just when things just started falling apart, I think they kind of got away from that a little bit, and that's where the Giants have to be. So he's Nick Falato. Nick, tell everyone where they could find you, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, X at Nick Falato. That is Falato. And you can find my written work at Big Blue View and Giants Country. And you can also find the podcast I do with Dan Schneier. It's called the Big Blue Banter Podcast. It's a lot of fun. Check it out.
So Nick Falato, Nick, you were great. Appreciate you joining me this Tuesday morning. We'll try to get it up later. But thanks to Paul Wood, our producer, and we will be back some point either this weekend or the beginning of next week to wrap up rookie minicamp. But for Nick Falato and Paul Wood, I'm Art Stapleton. We appreciate you being all in because we are all in. Hope you enjoyed today's show, and we'll catch you next time.